Captain Jake Morrison stared at the screens in front of him as massive shapes appeared in space above. Earth, the orbital defense station Liberty Prime, had been his home for 2 years, but he had never seen anything like this before. The alien. Ships were huge and looked like they were made of dark crystal that seemed to drink in the light from nearby stars. Jake pressed the communication button and spoke into his headset. His voice was calm, but inside his heart was beating fast. Lee. Other crew members on the station looked worried as they watched the alien fleet grow larger on their displays. There were 12 ships, and each one was bigger than anything humans had ever built. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez was in the command center, deep inside a mountain back on Earth. She had been expecting this day for years, but now that it was here, she felt cold fear in her stomach. The aliens had sent a message, and it was not friendly. They called themselves the Kithara, and they wanted Earth to surrender immediately. The alien voice came through the speakers, and it sounded like glass breaking, mixed with wind. The translation computer worked hard to change their words into English. The message was simple and terrible. Earth belonged to them now, and humans had one day to leave their cities or die. Dr. Kevin Phillips was working in his lab when the news came. He was a scientist who studied alien life, but he had never thought he would meet real aliens like this. The message from the Kithara made him think about their biology. They sounded different from humans, and their ships looked like they were grown instead of built. The first attack came 6 hours after the message. The Kithara chose New York City to show their power. Their plasma cannons fired beams of white-hot energy that cut through buildings like butter. The city that never slept was turned into a burning wasteland in minutes. Millions of people died before they could even scream. Jake watched from space as the earth below him burned. He tried to fire the station's weapons at the alien ships, but the energy beams just bounced off their shields. The Kithara technology was far beyond anything humans had created. Their ships moved without making sound, and their weapons could destroy entire city. Blocks with one shot. London was next, and then Tokyo. Each city died in the same way, with bright flashes of light, followed by fire and smoke. Commander Amy Turner was leading evacuation efforts in Washington when the orders came to retreat. There was no point in trying to fight enemies who could not be hurt by human weapons. The Kithara ships landed in the destroyed cities, and strange figures came out. They were tall and thin with skin that looked like black glass. They moved slowly, but with purpose as they began to set up their machines. The air around them shimmered with heat and made it hard to see them clearly. Dr. Phillips was studying video footage of the aliens when he noticed something important. The Kithara seemed to like hot places, and they were making the air around them even hotter. Their machines were changing the atmosphere and raising the temperature everywhere they went. This was not just an invasion, but a complete change of Earth to suit their needs. Moscow fell on the second day, and then Paris and Berlin. Each time the pattern was the same. The aliens would destroy the city with their weapons, and then land to start their terraforming machines. The survivors fled to the countryside or hid in underground tunnels and basements. Jake's station was running low on supplies, and the alien ships were getting closer. Admiral Rodriguez ordered all orbital stations to retreat to the dark side of the moon. It was a bitter defeat, but there was no choice. The Kithara controlled Earth's skies now, and humans were helpless against their superior technology. The evacuation was chaos as millions of people tried to escape the dying cities. Amy Turner worked without sleep to coordinate the refugee camps that were being set up in remote areas. The lucky ones made it to underground bunkers that had been built during the old Cold War. Others hid in caves or deep forests where the alien sensors could not find them. As the first week ended, Jake looked down at Earth from his hiding place. Behind the moon, the planet looked different now, with strange lights glowing where the cities used to be. The Cathara were changing everything to suit their needs, and humans were powerless to stop them. But in the hidden bunkers and secret bases, people were already planning their revenge. The war had just begun, and humanity had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the strongest enemy could be defeated, but it would take time and sacrifice. Aliens had destroyed their cities, but they had not destroyed the human spirit. In the darkness of defeat, a new kind of fire was already beginning to burn. 3 months had passed since the Cathara destroyed the great cities of Earth. Colonel Danny Wright lived deep inside Cheyenne Mountain with 3,000 other survivors. The military base had become their world now, with its thick walls of rock protecting them from the alien sensors above. Life underground was hard, but people were learning to survive. The mess hall served food grown in hidden greenhouses, and the lights were kept dim to save power. Children who had lost their parents played quietly in the corridors, while adults worked on plans to fight back against their invaders. Dr. Maria Santos had set up her laboratory in an old storage room. She spent her days studying pieces of alien technology that brave soldiers had brought back from the surface. The Cathara machines were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They seemed to be grown rather than built, and they all generated tremendous amounts of heat. The aliens were changing Earth to suit their needs. The temperature was rising everywhere, and the air was becoming thicker. Plants were dying and animals were fleeing to the polar regions where it was still cool enough to survive. The Cathara wanted Earth to become like their home world, which was much hotter than any place humans could live. Lieutenant Ben Clark was one of the scouts who went to the surface to watch the aliens. He had learned to move without being seen, and to hide from their flying machines. What he saw made him both afraid and hopeful. The Cathara were powerful, but they were not perfect. Ben noticed that the aliens moved differently at certain times of day. When the sun came up in the morning, they seemed slower and more careful. When it went down at night, the same thing happened. During these times, they stayed close to their heating machines and wore special suits that glowed with warmth. Dr. Santos was excited when Ben told her about this discovery. She had been studying the alien biology, and she thought she understood what was happening. The Cathara were like living crystals that needed stable temperatures to function properly. When the temperature changed too quickly, their bodies could not adapt fast enough. She shared her findings with Dr. Alex Parker, who was a physicist before the war. Alex understood immediately what this meant. The aliens could handle extreme heat, or cold if it stayed the same, but they had trouble when temperatures changed rapidly. Their crystal bodies were strong, but they were also brittle in some ways. General Steve Adams was the military commander of all the hidden bases on Earth. When he heard about the alien weakness, he called a meeting of his best officers. The room was crowded with people who had lost everything, but still wanted to fight. They listened carefully as the scientists explained their discovery. The plan they made was dangerous, but it was their only hope. They would build weapons that could create rapid temperature changes instead of trying to match the alien energy. Weapons. It would take time and resources they did not have, but there was no other choice. Rachel Smith was the communications officer, who kept all the hidden bases in contact with each other. She used quantum encryption to send messages that the aliens could not intercept. Her job was to coordinate the new plan across all the resistance groups around the world. The work began immediately in secret, factories hidden deep underground. Engineers who had once built cars and computers now worked on thermal weapons. The first designs were simple but effective. They used chemical reactions to create extreme temperature changes in small areas. Dr. Phillips joined the team and brought his knowledge of alien biology. He had been studying the Cathara for months, and he understood how their crystal bodies worked. The key was to create temperature shocks that happened faster than the aliens could compensate for them. The first test was conducted in a sealed chamber far from the main base. The prototype weapon created a zone that went from freezing cold to burning hot in less than a second. Then it repeated the cycle over and over until the test materials shattered from the stress. News of the successful test spread through the underground bases like wildfire. For the first time since the invasion, people began to hope that they might actually win this war. The aliens had superior technology, but humans had something more important. They had the will to survive and the intelligence to find their enemies. Weakness. Colonel Wright began training special teams to use the new weapons. The soldiers learned to move fast and strike hard before retreating back to safety. They would not try to hold territory, but instead would hit the aliens, where they were weakest, and then disappear. The Cathara were not fools, though, and they began to notice the pattern of attacks. Their response was swift and brutal. They increased the temperature even more and sent hunting parties to find the human bases. Several hidden camps were discovered, and their people were killed or captured. But the humans adapted too, and they learned from each attack. The thermal weapons became more powerful and more portable. Teams of fighters began to work together using coordinated strikes that the aliens could not predict or counter. As the fourth month of occupation began, the balance of power was starting to shift. The Cathara still controlled the surface and the Nathi skies, but deep underground humanity was preparing for the fight of their lives. The hidden base beneath the Rocky Mountains had become the center of human resistance. Dr. Phillips worked alongside engineer Tony Martinez in a workshop that never stopped humming with activity. They were perfecting the thermal bombs that would be humanity's answer to alien superiority. The devices looked simple, but they were the result of months of careful design. Each bomb contained chemicals that could create extreme temperature changes when mixed together. The reaction would alternate between super hot and super cold in rapid cycles that no Cathara body could handle. Captain Morrison led the first field test of the new weapons. His team had been watching a Cathara patrol for days, and they knew exactly where to strike. The aliens moved in groups of 3, and they always followed the same path through the ruins of Denver. The morning was cold when Morrison's team set up their ambush. They placed the thermal bombs along the alien patrol route and then waited in the shadows of a destroyed building. When the Cathara appeared, their crystal bodies gleamed in the early sunlight. Like black diamonds, Morrison activated the first bomb when the aliens were directly above it. The explosion was unlike anything the humans had seen before. Instead of fire and smoke, there was a zone of air that flickered between ice crystals and heat waves. The Cathara in the center of the blast began to crack like glass in a furnace. Aliens' crystal armor developed tiny fractures that spread across their bodies. Their movements became jerky and uncontrolled as their internal systems failed. Within seconds, all 3 invaders had collapsed into piles of broken crystal that steamed in the cold air. But the victory came with a price. The Cathara ships in orbit detected the attack immediately and began scanning the area with powerful sensors. Morrison's team had to retreat quickly before the aliens could locate their base. They carried pieces of the shattered Cathara bodies as proof that the thermal weapons actually worked. Major Catherine Brooks commanded the first real assault using the new technology. Her target was a Cathara outpost that controlled a geothermal power plant in Iceland. The aliens were using the natural heat to power their terraforming machines, and the base was heavily defended. Brooks led 50 fighters armed with thermal weapons and explosives. They approached the base at dawn when the aliens were most vulnerable to temperature changes. The plan was to create multiple thermal shock zones simultaneously and overwhelm the Cathara defenses. The attack began with thermal bombs placed around the perimeter of the base. As the aliens rushed to respond to the explosions, Brooks led her team directly into the compound. The Cathara soldiers fired their plasma weapons, but the humans were too fast and two spread out to hit easily. The thermal weapons proved devastating in close combat. Kithara warriors that had seemed invincible suddenly found their crystal bodies cracking under the rapid temperature changes. Their environmental suits provided some protection, but not enough to save them from the concentrated assault. Brooks reached the central control room where 3 Kithara commanders were coordinating the defense. She activated a powerful thermal device that filled the entire room with alternating waves of heat and cold. The alien commanders tried to retreat, but their movements became too slow and clumsy as their bodies began to fail. The victory at the Iceland base was complete, but it cost Brooks 15 of her best fighters. The Kithara had fought desperately, and their plasma weapons had killed several humans before the thermal weapons could take effect. Still, the base was destroyed, and its terraforming machines were shut down. Dr. Santos analyzed the captured alien equipment and made a disturbing discovery. The Kithara were not just changing Earth's atmosphere for their own comfort. Their home world was dying, and they needed Earth to survive as a species. This made them more dangerous because they had nothing to lose. The aliens responded to the human attacks by accelerating their terraforming efforts. The temperature rose even faster, and more of Earth's surface became uninhabitable. Cities that had survived the initial invasion were now being abandoned as the heat became too intense for human life. Dr. Parker made a breakthrough while studying the captured Kithara technology. He discovered that their ships had central power cores that required constant temperature regulation. If those cores were subjected to thermal shock, the entire ship would lose power and crash. The knowledge gave humanity a new target, but reaching the alien motherships would require weapons much more powerful than anything they had built so far. Parker began working on designs for thermal devices that could affect areas the size of city blocks instead of just small rooms. Jake Morrison returned from his hiding place behind the moon with volunteers from the other orbital stations. They had been building their own thermal weapons in space, using materials salvaged from destroyed satellites. The plan was to coordinate attacks from both space and ground to maximize the damage to alien forces. The Kithara were learning too, though, and they began developing countermeasures for the thermal attacks. Their newer environmental suits were better protected, and some of their soldiers carried devices that could neutralize the temperature weapons. The war was becoming a race between human innovation and alien adaptation. As winter approached, the resistance prepared for their biggest offensive yet. They had learned that fire could hurt the invaders, but they also knew that the aliens would not give up easily. The real battle for Earth was just beginning, and both sides were preparing to use every weapon at their disposal. The thermal weapons had given humanity hope, but hope alone would not be enough to win. They needed to strike at the heart of Kithara. Power before their world became too hot for any human to survive. Every hidden base on Earth had become a weapons factory. Former NASA engineer Pete Johnson worked in a converted subway tunnel beneath what used to be Chicago. His team was building delivery systems for the thermal weapons that could reach the alien motherships in orbit. The work was dangerous, and the conditions were terrible. They had no proper ventilation, and the heat from their welding torches made the tunnels almost unbearable. But Pete and his workers knew that millions of lives depended on their success, so they pushed themselves beyond their limits. Dr. Helen Wade had been a metallurgist before the war, and now she was creating new materials that could survive the extreme temperatures needed for the weapons. Her laboratory was hidden in an abandoned mine shaft where she worked with metals that had never been combined before. The thermal weapons required special containers that could handle rapid temperature changes without breaking. Helen's new alloys were stronger than steel, but flexible enough to expand and contract as the weapons cycled between hot and cold. Each container took days to make, and they needed thousands of them. Commander Turner was struggling to keep morale high as resources became scarce. Food was running low in many bases, and people were getting sick from the poor air quality underground. Some groups wanted to surrender and take their chances with the aliens rather than continue the hopeless fight. Turner visited every base she could reach to remind people why they were fighting. She showed them pictures of the destroyed cities and told them about the thermal weapon victories. Her words gave people strength, but she knew that hope alone would not be enough if they could not feed their children. The breakthrough came when Dr. Parker discovered how to weaponize Earth's own heat. The planet had massive geothermal systems that could be redirected and controlled if they had the right equipment. Instead of fighting the Cathara terraforming, they could use it against the aliens themselves. The first test was conducted in Iceland, where the resistance controlled several geothermal plants. Parker's team drilled new shafts deep into the earth and installed thermal regulators that could rapidly change the temperature of underground steam. When activated, the system created a thermal shock wave that covered several square miles. Tests destroyed a Cathara mining operation that had been strip mining the area for rare metals. The aliens in the facility died instantly when their crystal bodies shattered from the thermal shock. But the test also triggered several small earthquakes and damaged the local ecosystem. Captain Ryan Scott led the most dangerous mission of the war when his team infiltrated a Cathara command ship. The aliens had landed the vessel near the ruins of Los Angeles to coordinate their West Coast operations. Scott's mission was to steal intelligence about alien fleet positions and defensive systems. The team used thermal weapons to create entry points in the ship's hull. The crystal material of the alien vessel cracked under temperature stress, just like the Cathara bodies. Once inside, they found a ship that was more like a living organism than a machine. The walls pulsed with heat, and the corridors were filled with a thick atmosphere that made it hard to breathe. The team wore environmental suits, but they could still feel the intense heat through their protection. They had only minutes before the aliens detected their presence. Scott found the ship's central data core, which looked like a massive crystal formation. The information was stored in patterns of heat and light that his equipment could barely understand. He copied everything he could while his team held off the Cathara soldiers who were converging on their position. The escape was chaotic as more aliens arrived to defend their ship. Scott's team used their thermal weapons to clear a path, but they lost 2 good people in the fighting. The intelligence they gathered was worth the sacrifice because it revealed the location of every Cathara ship in the solar system. The data also confirmed Dr. Santis's theory about the alien home world. The Cathara planet was cooling rapidly, and their species faced extinction within a few generations. Earth was not just a conquest, but their only hope for survival. This made them desperate and even more dangerous. General Adams used the intelligence to plan Operation Solar Flare, which would be humanity's greatest offensive. The plan required perfect coordination between every resistance cell on Earth. They would strike every major Cathara installation simultaneously, using thermal weapons and geothermal attacks. The preparation took months as weapons and equipment were moved into position. Pete Johnson's delivery systems were deployed to bases around the world, while Helen Wade's thermal containers were filled with the deadliest temperature weapons ever created. Every human fighter trained for their specific role in the coming battle. Lisa Gonzalez had been building a secret base inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Her team of engineers and pilots had salvaged equipment from destroyed space stations to create humanity's first orbital assault platform. They would attack the Cathara motherships from space. While ground forces hit their surface installations. The aliens were not idle during this time, and they increased security around all their facilities. They had learned to expect thermal attacks and developed new countermeasures. Some of their soldiers now carried personal shields that could deflect temperature weapons for short periods. But humanity had learned too, and they were no longer the helpless victims they had been during the first days of the invasion. The thermal weapons had given them the power to hurt their enemies, and the captured intelligence had shown them where to strike. The final battle for Earth was about to begin, and both sides knew that the winner would control the future of human civilization. Operation Solar Flare began at exactly midnight Greenwich time, when every human resistance cell on Earth attacked simultaneously. Colonel Wright coordinated the ground assault from Cheyenne Mountain, while Commander Gonzalez led the space attack. From her asteroid base, the first targets were the Cathara communication arrays that connected their global network. Thermal weapons destroyed the crystal towers in seconds, as temperature shocks shattered their delicate structures. Without communications, the aliens could not coordinate their defenses effectively. In Australia, former miners used geothermal charges to collapse Cathara underground facilities. The thermal shock waves traveled through rock and metal to destroy alien equipment deep beneath the surface. Entire mining operations were buried as the Earth itself became a weapon against the invaders. Jake Morrison led an assault team against the largest Cathara base in North America. The facility was built inside the ruins of New York and was protected by powerful energy shields. Morrison's team used thermal bombs to create temperature differentials that overloaded the shield generators. The attack was brutal and desperate as human fighters poured through the gaps in the alien defenses. Thermal weapons turned the air itself into a killing zone where Cathara soldiers died as their crystal bodies cracked and shattered. The aliens fought back with plasma cannons, but their weapons were less effective in the chaotic close combat. Dr. Parker triggered the geothermal systems beneath Yellowstone Park to create the largest thermal shock wave in history. The massive underground explosion sent superheated steam and freezing air across hundreds of square miles. 3 Cathara motherships, caught in the blast zone, lost power and crashed into the mountains. The space battle was equally fierce as Gonzalez led her small fleet against the alien orbital platforms. Her ships were crude compared to Cathara technology, but they carried thermal weapons that could damage the crystal hulls of enemy vessels. The fighting was fast and deadly as both sides tried to gain control of Earth's orbit. Lieutenant Clark infiltrated a Cathara command center in the ruins of London, where alien commanders were trying to regain control of their forces. He placed thermal charges throughout the facility and then activated them all at once. The resulting temperature chaos killed dozens of high-ranking aliens and crippled their ability to respond to the human offensive. The thermal weapons were working better than anyone had hoped, but the cost was enormous. Many human fighters died in the attacks, and several cities were damaged by the geothermal explosions. Parts of California were shaken by earthquakes, triggered by the underground thermal charges. Amy Turner led the evacuation of civilian populations from areas where the fighting was heaviest. Her teams worked under constant alien bombardment to move thousands of people to safety. The Cathara were becoming more desperate as their positions were overrun, and they began targeting refugee camps and hospitals. The turning point came when Morrison's team reached the central power core of the New York base. The massive crystal formation was the size of a building, and it controlled the terraforming systems for the entire eastern seaboard. Morrison placed the largest thermal device ever built next to the core and activated it. The explosion that followed could be seen from space as temperature shocks radiated outward from the core. The crystal structure shattered into billions of fragments that rained down on the ruined city like deadly snow. Every Cathara facility within 50 miles lost power simultaneously, but the aliens had one final desperate move to make. The largest mothership began descending toward the Atlantic Ocean in a controlled crash that would create massive tsunamis and destroy the eastern coasts of both America and Europe. The ship was too damaged to retreat, but it could still kill millions of humans in its death. Clark and his team raced to intercept the falling vessel using thermal weapons, modified by Dr. Santos. The devices were designed to create temperature shocks powerful enough to break apart the massive ship before it hit the ocean. It was a suicide mission because no one could survive the explosion they were about to create. The team reached the ship when it was still 10 miles above the ocean. They placed their thermal charges along the ship's central structure and then tried to escape in their small aircraft. The explosion, when it came, was like a second sun appearing in the sky as the mothership broke apart in a cascade of temperature extremes. Clark's team died in the blast, but their sacrifice saved millions of lives. The pieces of the mothership fell harmlessly into the deep ocean instead of creating the devastating tsunami the aliens had planned. The largest threat to human survival had been eliminated. Across the world, the pattern was the same as Cathara forces retreated to their remaining ships. The thermal weapons had proven too effective, and the aliens could no longer maintain their positions on Earth's surface. But the victory had come at a terrible price in human lives and environmental damage. The geothermal attacks had destabilized several volcanic systems and changed weather patterns across the globe. Some regions now experienced extreme temperature swings that made them uninhabitable. Humanity had won the war, but they had also changed their world in ways that might take generations to understand. As the surviving Cathara ships retreated into space, the humans who remained began to count the cost of their victory. Cities lay in ruins, and the climate was permanently altered, but Earth belonged to humanity once again. The fire they had given to their enemies had burned away the invasion, but it had also transformed the defenders into something new and dangerous. 6 months after the final Cathara retreat, Earth was a world transformed by war. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of humanity's first interstellar defense station and watched construction ships rebuilding the orbital platforms. The new structures were equipped with thermal weapons powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. The destroyed cities had become memorials to human resistance and sacrifice. In the ruins of New York, a massive wall displayed the names of everyone who had died fighting the invaders. The wall was made from polished Cathara crystal that had been salvaged from destroyed alien ships, and it gleamed like black glass in the sunlight. President Angela Murphy had been elected to lead the new global government that emerged from the Yaste resistance councils. Her first speech was delivered from the steps of the rebuilt United Nations building, where she promised that Earth would never again be defenseless against invasion. The thermal weapons that had won the war would now protect the peace. Dr. Phillips led an expedition to the abandoned Cathara homeworld using one of the captured alien ships. What they found was a planet dying from thermal instability, where the crystal cities were slowly cracking apart. The Cathara had fled to Earth, not from conquest, but from desperation, as their world became uninhabitable. The discovery sparked a heated debate among the human leadership. Some wanted revenge for the millions who had died during the invasion, while others argued for mercy toward a species facing extinction. Phillips advocated for a middle path that would help the aliens while ensuring they could never threaten Earth. Again, Tony Martinez had become the head of the new Thermal Weapons Division, which was responsible for developing Earth's defenses. His engineers were working on projects that would have seemed impossible before the war, including thermal shields that could protect entire continents and weapons that could affect the temperature of star systems. The environmental damage from the war was slowly being repaired, but some changes were permanent. The Yellowstone geothermal system had been altered by the massive explosion and now provided clean energy for much of North America. Several new volcanic islands had appeared in the Pacific, where underwater thermal charges had shifted the ocean. Floor. Helen Wade had established factories on the Moon, and Mars, where her metallurgists created materials for the expanding human space fleet. The thermal weapons required special alloys that could only be made in zero gravity, and Helen's facilities produced the components for humanity's growing interstellar presence. Amy Turner commanded the new Refugee Relocation Authority, which was responsible for helping the millions of people displaced by the war. New cities were being built in areas that had been too cold for habitation before the climate changes. The northern regions of Canada and Siberia were now temperate zones, suitable for large populations. The Kithara survivors who remained in the solar system were confined to a small moon of Jupiter where they could live in the high temperatures. They required human guards armed with thermal weapons, watched them constantly, but also provided the aliens with the resources they needed to survive. It was a prison, but also a sanctuary. Ryan Scott had survived his injuries from the command ship infiltration, and now led the intelligence service that monitored alien activity throughout the galaxy. His agents used captured Kithara technology to detect other species that might threaten Earth and to establish contact with potential allies. The memorial service for Lieutenant Clark was held on the first anniversary of his sacrifice. Thousands of people gathered at the crater where the Kithara mothership had been destroyed to honor the man who had saved the eastern seaboard. A thermal flame that burned without fuel marked the spot where he had given his life for humanity. Lisa Gonzalez commanded the growing space fleet from her flagship, New Terra, which was built using a combination of human engineering and captured alien technology. Her ships patrolled the outer solar system and carried thermal weapons that could destroy planets if necessary. The fleet was humanity's guarantee that the invasion would never be repeated. D.R. Santos had established a research center dedicated to studying thermal science and its applications. Her discoveries were leading to advances in medicine energy production and space travel that would benefit all of humanity. The war had accelerated human development by centuries and opened possibilities that had never existed before. Who had been born during the occupation grew up in a world where thermal weapons were as common as computers had been before the war. They learned to use temperature-control devices in school and played games that would have terrified their parents. They were the first generation of humans who truly understood the power of fire and ice. The final scene took place in the rebuilt city of Geneva, where the World Thermal Council met to discuss humanity's future among the stars. Representatives from every nation and colony debated how to use their new power responsibly while ensuring that Earth would always be protected. President Murphy concluded her address to the Council with words that would be remembered for generations. She spoke of humanity's journey from victims to victors and from a single world species to the guardians of their corner of the galaxy. The aliens had destroyed their cities, but in return, humans had given them fire, and in doing so had forged themselves into something stronger. The war was over, but the age of human expansion had just begun. Armed with thermal weapons and the knowledge that they could overcome any challenge, humanity looked toward the stars with confidence. They had learned that sometimes the greatest mercy came through strength, and that their fire burned brightest when defending home. Earth was safe, and the universe awaited.